You don't need a background in electrical work or a ton of money to start a profitable EV charging business. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how to get started, even if you're brand new, because EV charging is one of the biggest opportunities and you can get a piece of it before it's too late. If you're thinking about starting an EV charging business, I'd be happy to help. My name's Trevor and I helped launch 2 successful EV charging startups. And for a limited time, I'm actually offering free consulting sessions. So if you're interested, you can book a time in the Calendly link below. That's hard to say. It's possible to make over 100 grand in passive income from EV chargers if you know what to look out for and make sure you do it right. And today I'll teach you what to look out for when it comes to understanding the overall concept of the business, the EV charging business. So how does this whole thing work? That was the first question I had when I entered the industry, and it took me a while to wrap my head around the whole concept and how everything fits together. When I first started out, I was thinking, okay, so this makes sense. You just install a couple chargers out there and whoever goes and uses the chargers, then the money that goes in then goes to whoever's charger it is, right? Pretty simple. But it's actually a lot more complicated than it looks on the surface. And the complicated parts are mostly related to all the different players that are involved and the role that they have. So yes, if you do break it down to its bare bones, the general concept is reselling electricity. I mean, the EV driver is getting the service of having their car charged, but essentially the product that's being sold is electricity or kilowatts, if you will. But to get the electricity from the utility company to inside the EV, there's a lot of different steps along the way and a lot of different people that are involved. And to make it even more complicated, the setups also change based on the different types of locations. So let's just use a simple example to explain this concept. Let's say that there's a local golf course and a lot of the members there seem to be driving EVs. So they decide that, this might be a pretty good idea to have a couple EV chargers that are installed in the parking lot. So when our customers come and visit, when they leave their car there for, a couple hours, at least they'll have a charge for when they're ready to leave. Okay, so let's say this golf course was privately owned and there was one main decision maker that was running the show on the operations. And this owner, they think, all right, it'd be a pretty good idea to install some EV chargers. So they go online and, they research a few companies and one of these EV charging companies pop up, right? So the owner calls them up and says, hey, I'm running this golf course. We're interested in installing some level 2 EV chargers. And the EV charging company says, sounds good. We'll schedule a site visit and we'll come and take a look at your location and check out your electrical room. So the EV charging company arrives on site and they actually bring their electrician because the electrician is going to be the one that's actually installing the EV chargers and connecting everything to the electrical room. So far, who are the players that we have involved? We have the host, who is the owner of the golf course. They're going to be hosting the EV charger. We have the EV charging company who's providing the EV charger or the supplier of the charger. And we also now have the electrician. And here's where you can actually go 2 ways with this. So instead of reaching out directly to the EV charging company first, which most hosts do because, that's what comes to mind. We need an EV charger. Let's reach out to an EV charging company. But you can also go through the electrician. And sometimes this is actually a pretty good idea because the electrician will work with a bunch of different EV charging companies. So instead of the EV charging company saying, hey, this is our offer, this is what the service is, this is what we provide and how much it costs, the electrician can say, oh, hey, well, we work with a handful of different suppliers. These are all of their different options and all of their different costs. So you can compare what your options are because you probably don't want to go with the first EV charging company that you talk to. You might end up going with them, but it's always best to compare a few different options out there and see what the alternatives are. And sometimes the EV charging company doesn't actually provide their own software. So this is the fourth player that's involved in this process. And all this is related to how the money flows. So from the start to the end, who gets a piece of the money when it goes through the process? Now, the owner of the golf course, we're going to call him Bob. Bobby Golf decided to move forward with the EV charging project. And he had to pay for a handful of different things in this project. He had to pay for the EV chargers themselves, the hardware. He had to pay for the install for the electrician to put everything in. He now has to pay a monthly rate for what's called the networking fee. And this is for the software. And the software is needed for a whole bunch of reasons, like processing the payments from the EV drivers. And another important one is something called load sharing. So this balances the electricity that's used to make sure it doesn't overload their electrical system. This isn't usually a concern when there's only a handful of chargers, but it does become very important. Let's say in an entire condo building where there's hundreds of chargers, but I'll get to that in a later video. And Bobby Golf will have to pay a few other small fees. Sometimes there's a transaction fee or a processing fee, but these are pretty minor, 2%. And the cool thing is, Bobby knew about these rebates that his city offered from the government for EV charging. So after the project was completed and he paid for everything, he sent his paperwork, his invoice into the local utility company and the government, and he applied for his incentives. And Bobby was able to get back 50% of the total project cost. So this worked out pretty well for him. But remember, he only got this back a few months after he paid for everything. He didn't get this up front. So let's take a look at how the money flows. Now the chargers are installed and they're all up and running. The first EV driver pulls up and he's all excited because now he can golf and charge his car at the same time. So first he sees that he has to download the app from the EV charging company. No big deal. He's used to doing this with driving an EV for a while. He puts his credit card info in. He's able to plug in and start charging. And now the electricity's flowing and also the money's flowing. So where does all this money go? Well, remember that Bobby is the one who is the proprietor of the location. So his name is likely going to be on the electricity bill. And whoever's name is on the electricity bill is really at the center of how all the money's flowing, because Bobby's still going to have to pay for the electricity that's going into the car. And sometimes locations will offer EV charging at a reduced cost or sometimes free as a nice amenity for people to visit, but this is becoming less common. And Bobby's pretty business minded, so he knows he's trying to make a profit from these chargers. And Bobby figured out that his blended rate of electricity is about 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And he's decided to charge 30 cents per kilowatt hour. So Bobby's making about 20 cents per kilowatt hour from people using his chargers. But does Bobby get 100% of that profit? This is where it starts to get a little sticky. Now, this depends on the type of contract that Bobby signed. If Bobby paid for everything, then there's a much higher chance that he's going to retain most, if not all, of the profit that goes into the chargers, but he's still going to have to pay for that monthly networking fee. But if the EV charging company paid for everything, Bobby didn't pay a dime, and he's on something called charging as a service, then it's likely that the EV charging company is going to take all of the profit to help pay them back for the cost of the project. So there's lots of different business models, and this is really what you're going to want to look out for when you're looking at the different offers. Now, I told you the story from Bobby's viewpoint and how he's seeing everything, because as the EV charging company, it's always good to have a firm understanding of your client's perspective. And as the EV charging company, you really got to know what's most important for your host or for your customer. Sometimes it's really important for the host or for your customer to make some profit from the EV chargers, but this isn't always the case. Let's say it's a business, they have 1,000 things going on, and the manager or the owner is already dealing with 1,000 things. They likely don't want to have one more thing on their plate that they have to manage. So it can be the case where they're like, look, you just take care of everything. You take all the profits. We don't want to deal with anything. If anything goes wrong, it's up to you to fix it. We're really here just trying to provide an extra service for our customers. And there's also more benefits for the EV charging company. And this is something called carbon credits. So all the kilowatts that are flowing through those chargers can be added up and applied to the government for carbon credits. And these carbon credits are just continuing to increase in value. So this is almost like icing on top of the cake. Again, if you need help with anything, feel free to give me a shout. My email's in the description below. I can help you with rough project pricing, quotes, referrals, and also just give you some pro tips on what to look out for. Next video, we're going to take a look at all the different types of locations and the best ones to target. So keep an eye out for that. And as always, I'd love if you were to subscribe to the channel and keep following the journey. Thanks so much for checking in, and I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.